I'd like to respond to EDC 2879. I believe that's the username. You left a few comments on my denying animal rights video. Try my best to explain the animal rights position on it. Okay? He starts out, Roger Scruton, the British philosopher, argues that rights imply obligations. Every legal privilege, he writes, imposes a burden on the one who does not possess that privilege. That is, your right may be my duty. Scruton therefore regards the emergence of the animal rights movement as, quote, the strangest cultural shift within the liberal worldview, unquote. Because the idea of rights and responsibilities is, he argues, distinctive to the human condition, and it makes no sense to spread them beyond our own species. Yeah. The idea that somehow those who can conceive of the idea of rights and responsibilities are not obligated to extend those very rights and responsibilities to those who lack the ability to conceive of rights and responsibilities is faulty. We regularly extend rights and responsibilities to those who we know can't bear the same responsibilities as we do, and who may have little idea of what exactly rights mean or of their utility to society. We do this because we are afraid of the slippery slope. We want to find a definitive line to include and exclude others in our community of rights holders. Currently and legally in the West, we draw it around all humans because that's a fairly black and white issue. It's not hard to tell the difference between a human and a non-human. So that is where the line is currently drawn. That line protects all humans and is generally perceived as having great utility for our human society. In the past, the West didn't extend equal rights to all humans and had a very indefinite line of who exactly deserved what rights, which ultimately led to numerous atrocities, as I'm sure all of us have read about if you're like over the age of 12. In the future, human society may decide to move that line again in order to exclude certain groups of humans and exploit them. And then again, we may begin to include non-human animals for various reasons. The idea that it would be strange to extend rights beyond our own species is purely a subjective opinion of Scruton. If he can't see the utility behind extending rights to non-humans, then that's his own fault. If anyone species was dangerous to extend rights to, it's human beings, given our extremely aggressive tendencies to exploit other sentient beings, including humans. This then takes us into the next part of your comment. To quote you, you say, he accuses animal rights advocates of pre-scientific anthropomorphism, you're talking about Scruton here, attributing traits to animals that are, he says, Beatrix Potter-like, where, quote, only man is vile. It is within this fiction that the appeal of animal rights lies, he argues. The world of animals is non-judgmental, filled with dogs who return our affection almost no matter what we do to them, and cats who pretend to be affectionate, when in fact they only care about themselves. It is, he argues, a fantasy, a world of escape. Unquote. Okay. There's certainly some truth in this statement. Some animal rights activists are openly and secretly misanthropic. In my personal opinion, this is irrational and a display of over-emotion on the part of animal rights activists. However, I think it's only fair to point out that many people who do not support animal rights are misanthropic. They see humans as evil, unnatural, corrupted beings in a world of innocence. But nevertheless, they see no reason to extend rights to non-human animals. However, this irrational idea of human beings being inherently evil is not an indication of what animal rights is about, or that those who support animal rights will necessarily become misanthropic. We have to keep in mind that when we say animal rights, that we're also talking about human rights, since humans are animals. It makes absolutely no sense for someone to be pro-animal rights while simultaneously being anti-human rights. That's like someone being pro-animal rights simultaneously being anti-rabbit. Next you say, Carl Cohen, professor of philosophy at the University of Michigan, argues that rights holders must be able to distinguish between their own interests and what is right. Quote, the holders of rights must have the capacity to comprehend rules of duty governing all, including themselves. In applying such rules, they must recognize possible conflicts between what is in their own interest and what is just. Only a community of beings capable of self-restricting moral judgment can the conception of rights be correctly invoked. Okay, this begs the question right off the bat. Are non-human animals incapable of self-restriction? Unfortunately, if I have witnessed over the years, this answer seems to rest solely on the eye of the beholder. From my experience, I have witnessed non-human animals practice moral judgments and apply them regularly. When a dolphin saves a human being from a shark, are they acting upon their morals? Are they anti-shark? Are they pro-human or pro-mammal? Is it just a random chance that they attacked a shark at the same time that it was attacking a human? Do bears make moral judgments when they choose not to eat a vulnerable human in their midst? Or is this just an indication of them acting on their perceived self-interest, knowing that humans hold great power and that it is far better to appease them than to attack them? If it is indeed appeasement, then we must ask if this is any different than what humans do. At our core, I would argue that Homo sapiens are social animals. That is perhaps our greatest characteristic of all. That's what makes us us. We build alliances with those we think can help us reach our ends. Most of humans' ethical decisions are merely just humans trying their best to appease potential allies rather than some independent, deep-seated conviction. In a larger form, this turns into human civilizations, which can be viewed as millions of humans appeasing one another in ways that support individuals. Yet it is very rare that we say to humans who merely just go with the flow of the contemporary ethics of their civilization that they are unworthy of rights because they apparently lack the ability to moralize. There is an inherent flaw to the idea that non-human animals lack the ability to moralize. Evidence. There is no evidence to support this theory. This is just a relic idea of the past that has lingered in human society virtually unchallenged because harming non-human animals with ethical impunity has had short-term utility. That does not mean that non-human animals don't moralize. We must keep in mind that this was the same argument the so-called civilized humans used to brutally slaughter and conquer other humans, who were perceived as barbarians. This idea was racist as opposed to speciesist, wherein the so-called barbarians lack the ability to moralize at the same level as civilized human populations could, which is the exact same argument humans routinely make when trying to justify harming non-human animals. If we are going to try to use this argument to harm non-human animals, it would seem that the burden of proof should lie on the shoulders of those making the claim, not upon the shoulders of non-human animals to prove to us that they can't, especially when we know the non-human animals cannot communicate in the same way that we do. Not the exact same way. They cannot walk up to us and expound ideas on us in the same way that we can to each other. We know that. They are handicapped in that issue. Not to say that their forms of communication are any less persuasive within their own species, but to us, they lack that significance. That's not their fault, though. We can't actually sit there and blame them for that. But people do. The fact is, many non-human animals simply live in very tough conditions, often harboring on the edge of death, which doesn't afford them many opportunities to display acts of charity towards beings of other species or even within their own species. This should not be confused as being unable to moralize. Not having an opportunity and not being able to act upon an opportunity are very different from one another. For example, if I had the wealth of Warren Buffett, I'd probably do many things differently than I do now, but since I don't, I can't. A good example of this is the domesticated dog versus the feral dog. Dogs with comfort, luxury, and a strong sense of security will, more often than not, make decisions that a starving, injured feral dog will, because the two have much different options at their disposal. Some might say that the feral dog is contemptible and should be destroyed, as in Romania, as Russia have recently shown us, for their aggressive tendencies. But is that really a judgment of the dog's individual actions or a judgment of the dog's situational decisions? You continue. Cohen rejects Singer's argument that since a brain-damaged human cannot make moral judgments cannot be used as a distinguishing characteristic for determining who is awarded rights. Cohen writes that the test for moral judgment is not a test to be administered to humans one by one, but should be applied to the capacity of members of the species in general. Why? This seems to drastically conflict with the Western idea and preference towards individual liberties and responsibilities we were just talking about before. We never judge each other based upon how our group acts. We judge based upon the acts of the individual. We never give someone a pass for violating the agreed upon rights of others simply because the individual violating has the ability to not commit the violation, or that his group in general doesn't commit said violation often. This is nothing more than a speciesist exemption for humans to justify treating non-human animals differently than humans. Okay, next you continue. R.G. Frey, I believe it's Frey, maybe Free. I must admit that I'm not very aware of this professor. The professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University is a preference utilitarian as a Singer, but reaches a very different conclusion, arguing in Interest in Rights, 1980, that animals have no interest for the utilitarian to take into account. Frey argues that interests are dependent on desire and that no desire can exist without a corresponding belief. Animals have no beliefs because a belief state requires the ability to hold a second-order belief, a belief about the belief, which he argues requires language. Quote, if someone were to say, example given, the cat believes that the door is locked, unquote, then that person is holding, as I see it, that the cat holds the declarative sentence. Quote, the door is locked to be true. And I could see no reason whatever for crediting the cat or any other creature which lacks language, including human infants, with entertaining declarative sentences. Okay. First off, the obvious problem with this idea is that somehow language is some sort of gateway to having beliefs and second-order beliefs. And this begs the question, what type of language are we talking about? Are physical gestures considered language? Because non-human animals clearly communicate with physical gestures. Is only human speech considered language? And if it is, why? Because many non-human animals communicate ideas with audio, just they don't use formal human language. Is there some sort of line where audio sounds cease being non-language and begin to be language? And if there is, then I think we need to establish why it is placed where it is. More often than not, anti-animal rights activists fail to provide any explanation for this, but simply state that human speech is clearly language, but all non-human forms of communication aren't language, as though it's self-evident when it clearly isn't. Secondly, I don't understand how any objective person can claim animals don't have desires or interests. This is extremely arbitrary. I see no more reason to say a dolphin lacks a desire as I do to say that a horse, a human, a hawk, a herring, or a hedgehog lacks desire.